Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord.
Elijah,
Shout, shout, shout.
Elijah,
Shout, 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 shout. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord.
Satan is a liar and a conjure too. You don't mind how he'll conjure you. If I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Ezekiel said he saw him wheeling in the middle of the wheel. John talked about it, the book of the seven seals. Some said the rose of Sharon, others said the Prince of Peace. But I can tell the world he's been a rock and a shelter for me. Hallelujah. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah, Lord.
Men and women of God across America, God is raising up intercessors to pray for your youth in America. Our goal, 7,000, praying only for 7 minutes at 7 a.m. God has commissioned me to focus on Atlanta, Georgia, and I am believing God for 7,000 intercessors across America to call upon the name of the Lord for this millennium. Brothers and sisters, mom and dad, grandparents, you have to fight for your children and grandchildren and for the youth of Atlanta. Prayers will be key ingredient in helping us create young leaders in media, music, television, building games and entertainment, and much more.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word.
The prophet Elijah Hill said God spoke to him and said to raise up 7,000 intercessors that will pray for 7 minutes a day at 7 a.m. each morning in Atlanta. We're claiming the promise of saving 3,000 souls that they will touch and impact the destiny of 300,000 youth in Atlanta. Register for free online at ElijahLHill.com or call 877-444-7027. That's 877-444-7027 to be one of the Atlanta 7,000. Instead of talking about it, we'll be praying for the youth of Atlanta, raising up the next generation, speaking life into their future and God-ordained purpose.
These are the days of Elijah.
We have such a great show of leaders, and Dr. King had such a great heart for God, and had such a great heart, for God's people, and he definitely had what you call a servant leadership's heart. He was a servant leader. He served the people. His passion was to stand on behalf of God's people, even to the point of sacrifice of his own personal life, and during the civil rights movement of the 60s. So I wanted to really honor him in looking at this particular show. You can go to my website, ElijahLHill.com, ElijahLHill.com, and click on All Nations Radio to hear the broadcast, or you can even download All Nations Radio on your Android phone or on your Apple phone in order to access this anywhere throughout the world. This particular broadcast, which it will be airing on Mondays, Eastern Time in America at 6 p.m. So what I want to do is touch on some historical points of interest concerning Dr. Martin Luther King's perspective, as a leader in America. First, what I want to do is first touch on how my personal connection back to Dr. King and his wife through my mother, Mary Hill. She had an opportunity in the early 60s. She was a great advocate, social advocate in America, in Omaha, Nebraska. And when Dr. King was assassinated, she was inspired to come to Atlanta, Georgia in 1960, right after Dr. King was assassinated, probably a couple of months after she moved all of her 6 children and herself. And she came, she felt that God wanted her to be an encouragement to Coretta Scott King because of her loss and the family's loss of the head of their household. And she did get an opportunity to meet Coretta in 68. We ended up being a part of Ebenezer Baptist Church in the 60s at that time. And my mom and Coretta was able to connect. And it was such a blessing with me recently moving here to Atlanta, Georgia, is the fact that, this history of my mom and her connection was such a blessing and an honor. My mother put together a book, at the time, a booklet, pamphlet booklet, probably about 30 pages. It was called Sell What You Have and Give to the Poor, but my mom's passion was helping the poor. And because the theme of her book, Sell What You Have and Give to the Poor, was about, dealing with the plight of everyday man and the needs of people. My mom would always say that really if a lot of people took all of the clothes that they had in their closet that they're keeping, that they cannot even wear, and would just donate those clothes to the needy, no one in America would be lacking of having clothing. And my mom was correct on that. She used to have a mission, and she used to give away clothing. We planted gardens and fed people every year in her ministry. So I have a heart and a passion for people, and a heart and a passion for the poor, as my mom did. But I think she really connected with Dr. King's message also through the book that the pamphlet she put together called Sell What You Have and Give to the Poor, which connected more so with Dr. King's last piece when he did the March on Washington called the Poor People's Campaign. And Dr. King was trying to really focus on the fact of realizing that even with civil rights, that people still was able to get their rights, that true justice in America would focus around people being able to have access economically so they could be elevated from an economic position. And that's why he called it the Poor People's Campaign, because he knew that people needed to have access economically, that they needed to be able to enjoy, the wealth, so to speak, of this country, and it needed to be equally distributed. And so the title of this show is The State of the Union of the Christian Church from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s historical perspective. And I just appreciate my mother going back. She connected to Coretta, so that Coretta's secretary helped to type basically half of that booklet, and then Dr. King's secretary at the time, she typed the other half of my mom's booklet. So that's how interconnected her and Coretta were at the time, right after Dr. King's assassination. My mother left, went back. She had some issues with her mother, and after about a year and a half, we moved back, ended up going back to Omaha, Nebraska. But I thank God for the connection there and the legacy, there. And but I wanted to touch bases on something that I think is vitally important, and I think we don't really look at how we lead today. And I think that having a heart for the people is a very important thing. And so what I want to do is review Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail when he was in Birmingham, and he shared about 10 points in that letter. And I have this on my Facebook page. If you just look up Elijah Hill, you'll see some of the things that I will be sharing with you today. But one of the points that he made, and the reason why I'm sharing this is because it's so easy for us today. I think we have the state of the Christian church as such, that we become so sensitive to not speaking out and being bold enough to say what it is that needs to be said when it's time to take a stand for what's right and wrong. And I think that's where we are today in this modern Christian church. We kind of sit back idly and we kind of let things be as they are, but we don't take a stand. But this is what Dr. King basically was doing. This was the premise of his leadership, which was really a philosophy of Nimberg's philosophy of the prophetic tradition. And the prophetic tradition, the philosophical position, is the fact that a leader will rise up. As I was stating before, it is very, very important, for Dr. King to have projected to the public through his dissertation that he put together in the Birmingham letter. He was, trying to project, the importance of justice. And so his 10th point dealt with the extremism for love, and that was the title of that. He dealt with 10 points, but one was extremism for love. And what he stated was, and I'm quoting Dr. King, he said, was not Jesus an extremist in love? When Jesus said, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, pray for them that despitefully use you, was not Amos an extremist for justice? Let justice roll down like the waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? I bear in my body, Paul quoted, the marks of the Lord Jesus Christ. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Martin Luther quoted, here I stand. I can do none other, so help me God. Then Dr. King quoted in the Birmingham letter, was not John Finan an extremist? And then he said, I will stand in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. Was not Abraham Lincoln, Dr. King quoted, an extremist? This nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And then Dr. King quoted in the Birmingham letter, was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And Dr. King, he shared these particular points to lend solidification to the question that people had in their minds. Why would he, as a leader, take out time to rise up to make a stand for justice? And he looked at all these other people throughout history and seen how they themselves took a stand for justice. They themselves took a stand for that which was right. And so Dr. Martin Luther King, he took the same stand, that this is a stand for an extremism for love, that there is a heart to care for people no matter what the situation. And this is truly a servant's heart. And so the question, Dr. King, I quote Dr. King, and he said, and so the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate? Or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice? Or will we be extremists for the cause of justice? And this I quote from Dr. Martin Luther King's letter in the Birmingham jail, where he was trying to expostulate to the world the importance of why he took a position to make a stand and why he allowed himself to be arrested. He allowed himself to stand against the tyranny that was going on in America. And so Dr. King, he made it plain that he was not in agreement with those that would preserve injustice. Some people want to preserve wrong, even though it's wrong. Some people want to preserve things that are inequitable within our society, whether it's jobs, whether it's killing. Sometimes people are being killed nowadays. Things are going on in Ferguson and other areas. Why is it that this nation cannot see that when an African American is killed today, that if police accidentally or seemingly are firing shots on them, why is it, if it's an accident and it has nothing to do with racism within America, why is it that it's not Hispanics being killed accidentally? Why is it that it's not white men being killed accidentally? Because there's a pattern, there's a consistency. So Dr. King said, I will stand up for the preservation, not to preserve injustice, but I'm an extremist for love, for the cause of justice. And that's what we have to do. We have to realize that we all have a place to stand up for that which is right. And that's the reason why I'm sharing this broadcast today with you, because I want you to know that a lot of times we have watered down and we've moved away from the standard of the man of God, the standard of the preacher, and some of us have sold out to the prosperity gospel, where our focus is around ourselves. Our focus is around our own successes. And no doubt I don't have a problem with the success of the preacher, for I'm a preacher myself. I want to be successful. I believe in prosperity. I believe in God's blessings for that which you have taken out time to truly serve God for. But what I do disagree with is the fact that we have gotten to the point, we moved away from not being like Dr. Martin Luther King, where we're willing to sacrifice to pull everybody along with us. But we've gotten to the point where it's about me, my four, and no more. And so this is what has inspired my passion, beloved, to share with you historically the context of how would Dr. Martin Luther King see the Christian church, the State of the Union address. How would he address how we look at things today, how we see what we do? And so I wrote another presentation on Facebook, and I just want you to know that I, Reverend Elijah Hill, stand here today as an extremist for the cause of justice. When I wrote this some time ago, some people thought that I had, was attacking the church. But basically, I believe that what Dr. Martin Luther King would not agree with the present mindset of the Christian church and the leaders of the Christian church. Instead of being for the people, the majority are for themselves. And so I speak this only as an extremist for the cause of justice within the Christian church, between the preacher and their congregation. And I shared this, and I want to share it with you, this quote. I said, the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached into all the world. And I stated, I don't have a problem with the success of the preacher today, for I am one myself. But when celebrityism, it's about me, my four, and no more, get it now, nobody needs to be seen type of attitude pervades the church. And to me, that's our perspective in a hidden way. We have selfishness going on. We have superstars being worshipped in their place, and it's about just lifting themselves up. It's really not about the people. It's really not about pulling people along with them like we used to be about collectivism and groupism. It's about the whole, but it's about the few at the top. And this is where I feel Dr. Martin Luther King would have a different perspective, because he was more focused around the whole. He was more like Jesus. Jesus was more focused around the whole of society, the greater need of society. Only the elite groups, it seems like, at the top are fighting to maintain their positions. Why is it that so many, we have cliques at the top of the body of Christ? Certain people they let in, and certain people they don't let in on television, on Christian television. We have certain clique groups that only come together for meetings, conferences. It's like, we're so cliquish. We become so cliquish, and then we fight if God is raising someone else up. And I believe that Dr. Martin Luther King would not be in agreement with the way we have transitioned in the Christian church, where we have only the elite groups at the top fighting to maintain their position, even behind closed doors, sometimes using their money, their mouth, and power to crush people that are below them because they're afraid and threatened of other people. I just don't believe this is your calling, men of God. I don't believe that's why God has called you to the ministry. I believe that as Dr. Martin Luther King's life was, it is your purpose to be able to be successful. But I believe that it's not God's will for you to be threatened of other people in the body of Christ and take a sellout position to be at the top. And once you're there, you don't care about nobody else but yourself. You're not willing to help. I believe this is idolatry. Literally, the church has, with this celebrityism, has evolved into idolatry and worshiping of idols. We need to be able, there's nothing wrong with one growing. There's nothing wrong with, I don't have a problem with people growing. I don't have a problem people becoming successful. I have a problem with a selfish attitude. When one has an attitude where they have forsaken the true purpose of why God put them in place. He put them in place in order for them to be able to help the multitude and be able to help all God's children. Well, God bless you today. I appreciate you tuning in, and we're going to continue on with this presentation next week. Reverend Elijah Hill's State of the Union address of the Christian Church from Dr. Martin Luther King's historical perspective. God bless you.
The achievements of black people have spilled over into America's history as a great river whose tributaries influence a multiplicity of facets of America's culture and global distinction. Yet there is one aspect of the African American experience that is uncompromised, but unrecognized as the flagship of Black culture in America, and that is the Black church. The achievements of Black people have spilled over into America's history as a great river whose tributaries influence a multiplicity of facets of America's culture and global distinction. Yet there is one aspect of the African American experience that is uncompromised, but unrecognized as the flagship of Black culture in America, and that is the Black church.
Well, hello, here we are with the live telecast that we told you all about called The Soul of Black Religion. We're so excited to be here today. My name is Elijah Hill. I'm your host, and we're going to talk about some very interesting topics dealing with the African American church. And those of you that are listening, if you're chiming in online, you ought to be able to give us a call at any point, and we'll try to see if we can take your messages in between our break time and try to address some of your questions. Today I have with me my guest is all the way from Richmond, Virginia, Dr. Roscoe Cooper, the pastor of the Metropolitan African American Baptist Church. Dr. Cooper, are you online?
We're online, Doctor. Welcome, and thank you, Dr. Hill, for inviting me and having me as your guest tonight. And I look forward to our time together as we talk a little bit about the African American church and about how God has used that in relationship to our struggle to be who God wants us to be and do what God wants us to do.
Amen. Well, I just want the people to know just a little bit about you, but can you just share just a little bit about your ministry for about 5 minutes, and we'll go right into our dialogue.
Sure. I am the senior pastor of the Metropolitan African American Baptist Church. We're located at 5263 Warwick Road in the city of Richmond, Virginia, on the south side of the city. Our church is 20 years old, and we began in 1993 because God burdened my heart to recognize that the reason that there's so much pathology in the African American community is because they had grown up a generation of African American people who did not know God in terms of who God is and who God has been in our history and experience. Wow. And so our church was birthed that we might birth, nurture, and grow up African Americans and other people who would know God, who would trust God, who would love God, and who would serve God on the basis of God's revelation of Scripture, supremely in Jesus Christ, and through God's activity as Holy Spirit in our life and history and experience as African American people.
Amen. Well,
a church.
I think it's very, what's so fascinating, though, Pastor, about your church, and it's very, very unique, and that's why I wanted you to come on board to begin our discussion from a historical perspective, because it sounds like, you all lean more toward an Afrocentric perspective, with your church in the sense of the roots of African American people. Can you just share just a moment of that, and then we're going to go right into the dialogue?
Certainly. As I said, we came to believe that the reason for so much pathology in African American communities is because they joined a generation of African American people who didn't know God in terms of who God has been and how God has been active in our history and experience. And God, the Bible is the story of God's revelation of God's self in the history of Israel in the Old Testament and in the history of people of Israel who believe Jesus to be the Messiah in the New. And the chief testimony of the Scripture is that God is active in history for people through people, and that each people have to recognize how God has been active in their history. So we read the Bible to recognize who God is, what God has done, that we might be able to recognize what God is doing in our own history and experience and how God would have us respond to Him and to what's going on in our life.
All right. Well, hey, that's wonderful, Pastor. That's amazing, and I appreciate your, your adamacy and your passion about the Afrocentric perspective, of us as a people. Now, what we want to look at, the title of this show is The Soul of Black Religion. And basically, what we want to start with on this show is begin to allow the people to look at the transition of our history historically of how we functioned as a people from a historical perspective. So one of the things I'm going to point out is if you look at the beginning of the black church, it was really like a safe haven, a place in an institution, a social institution, even though it's religious, but it still evolved into a social institution. And what I mean by a social institution, for some of you all that are listening, some of my listeners, or if you look at the church from the historical perspective of when it started with the Methodist Church, with Methodism, from Allen's perspective, when they began to worship with white in the Methodist Church, and it got to a point where in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, first they used to fellowship with African Americans, and it got to the point where they began to separate them from a worship position. And so Allen and Absalom Jones ended up actually protesting by, not allowing themselves to be put out of the church because they wanted to pray when the rest of the individuals prayed that were Caucasian. And so what they did, they protested by saying, well, hey, no man can stop me from worshiping God. So they were trying to tell them not to worship, with the white Americans. And so some people think the beginning of protests in America started with Rosa Parks. But basically protests started in the Methodist Church in regard to the recognition that whenever God has called me to worship you, no man stands between my worship. And so Allen and Absalom Jones protested that by standing in that church despite them trying to physically accost them and continue to pray. And to me, that's the beginning of the evolution of protest as far as African Americans are concerned. But another piece that is real interesting that you'll find in African American church, if you look at the evolution of it, Allen and them ended up going from the point of taking it to court because the white Methodists wanted to control their finances. So what they did, they actually in the 1800s ended up having a lawsuit that went to the Supreme Court that actually validated African Americans being able to have the liberty of religious worship themselves and have control of their finances, which is the bridgestone to why most churches are able to have the freedom of religion that are African American. It really spun off the African American church as far as Methodists were concerned. So that's why I'm bringing that up, as a bridge when we look at the soul or the beginning origin of how the church became a safe haven, and that evolved even with other faiths. But Pastor, did you have any input in regard to that particular historicity, or anything kind of came to your spirit and mind?
I think that really, if you want to talk about the African American church, that it really precedes. You kind of got to go back 1600s, 1700s when black folks were struggling with the whole issue of how they were to survive and come to grips with their new situation as slaves brought here from Africa, where they pressed into an environment that was alien to them and having to deal with the horrors of slavery. Brought here, they were brought here from various parts of Africa, and they were mixed so that it was difficult for them to communicate, difficult for them to socialize. Just the fact that some of those that were found themselves together had been enemies in Africa, had not been raised together. So first thing they had to come to grips with was how do we learn how to be in this new environment, and religion and Christianity became a means by which they were able to begin to forge a new identity and make some sense out of the nonsense of the new situation that they found themselves in, and especially with the messages that were being put upon them that you are not human, you are beast, you have no value, no significance, and so that the Christian faith became eventually the means by which they began to forge a new sense of identity, a new way of relating to one another, a new way of being together in this context. And so the anti-Christian church, the invisible institution they called it, on the slave plantation became the means that emerged into an institutional form in the Methodist Church and certain Baptist churches and other expressions.
Well, this is very interesting that you brought up that particular point about the identity aspect, because of the way, Jim Crow was, the way in which, the Willie Lynch mentality was. It put African Americans in a position where they needed something once, they were free from slavery, but they needed something to help them to undergird their identity. And one of the very interesting aspects of identity I want to bring out that I also promoted early on in this program is what I call collectivism and groupism. Now, collectivism and groupism, Pastor, is the identity, actually a piece of the identity of African Americans that they utilize in order for them to pull together socially, and they use the church as a safe haven. I remember early on when people would, a lot of people that first went to college in the late 1800s, some of the first African Americans, a lot of times people would, the church would take pennies and give pennies until they came up with some of the money to try to finance and to support African Americans going to college. And this is what I call collectivism, where people are coming together collectively, and they use the church as an institution, as a safe haven, in order to come together, and to forge ahead, in a positive light, to influence their communities in a positive way. And so to me, that's part of the soul of black religion originally. For example, also, you had individuals that there used to be a time you could go to someone's house and knock on their doors if you needed food. People were open. People were, it was more of a culture with African Americans where they were willing to help each other, pull each other up from the bootstraps. Now, today we're evolving away from that, but I really wanted to just visit that in the sense of looking at how we first started, where we were, because, see, we want, Pastor, we're not going to know where we're going if we didn't know where we came from. So touch on that a little bit about groupism and collectivism from the African American church as a safe haven and socially.
Yeah, but, I did that, again, you have to go back to the antebellum period when black folks were dealing with just how do we care for each other. And given the reality of slavery, the brutality of slavery, the beatings, the being sold away, families being disrupted, destruction of family, and so that the faith and the antebellum church, so to speak, became the means by which our people were able to care for each other and make some sense out of the nonsense of this existence. So there was no way that they could be with one another and be for one another, and the faith and the beginning of the church became the means by which they were able to do that. I think that social reality came out of theological reality, because when you look at the whole issue of slavery and the way that religion has functioned, religion often functions to provide theological justification for social and economic and political reality in our country. When they, at the points we talk about 1600s, 1700s, the Christian faith was certainly functioned differently than it functions now, and so that white folks appeal to the scriptures to justify slavery. They said that they went to Africa. They were saying to take the gospel to the ends of the earth. They brought these folks here to Christianize them, and in the process of doing that, they enslaved them. And then the church said, the first problem that they had is that if we're going to make these folks Christians, the faith said that one Christian couldn't hold another Christian in slavery. And so the church, the bishops and the scholars of the church came and said, well, that you can get them saved for heaven. It doesn't alter their earthly status. And then that meant that we can now begin to share the faith with these folks, because that doesn't mean that we can't use them as slaves. It said, secondly, that and so that was a theological justification for political and economic reality. And by the same token, black folks, when they ran to grab a hold of the faith, they grabbed a hold of the faith because their reading of the scripture said that what white people were saying to them about who God was and what their situation was a lie, because God did hear slaves cry, God did see their affliction, and God did move to liberate them. So the first thing that black folks dropped from the Christian faith was because they saw there a God who was committed to their freedom. And that
now, Pastor, this is a good, excellent point to segue in what you're talking about here about the theological perspective of African Americans utilizing theology as their platform and their perspective. And a lot of people term that liberation theology. You know, when we look in the light of liberation as the premise of freedom, and through Christianity, through the door of Christianity, through the Word of God, I think one thing that the slaves would look at is, for example, when they begin to read the Scriptures and see that Israel, when Pharaoh, had them under bondage, basically they believed, that, God could deliver them from the hand of Pharaoh, and that's how they looked at their oppressors from that standpoint. So this is where the birth of liberation theology basically evolved first with people's cultural perspective from Christianity, and then evolved into an actual theological position. Now, when we see the actual the liberation theology really take full shape and full bloom beyond the social institution side of the churches through Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, he's the heaviest proponent of liberation theology because it, you begin to see the church. Well, one man that I think he used it as his premise was Nimberg Rimherd. Now, Nimberg Rimherd was a theologian and a philosopher in 1932, and he believed in what you call the prophetic tradition. And in quote, what the prophetic tradition meant was it meant that it was a religious leader that evolved from the standpoint of from religion to begin to address social and political needs of individuals in the community where there was a moral factor involved where they weren't being treated right by the community. And so Dr. Martin Luther King quoted him even when he was in the Birmingham jail, about Nimberg's philosophy, because a lot of Euro-Americans respect his philosophical studies, on that, about the prophetic tradition. And to me, the prophetic tradition really is the true mantle of the church, and it goes back to the prophets of old. But, Pastor, I want you to speak to that, or what's your thoughts about that in regard to the prophetic tradition from the church's position?
Well, again, and I guess I see it as emerging, and I think that when you look at Black history, when you look at African American history, that if you do a typology, you've got or periodization, you've got the slave you've got the slave experience, 1619 to 1865 emancipation, and then the end of the Civil War, and then you've got the period of from the end of the war until 1876, when you have the compromise that results in the emergence of segregation and then discrimination, and that takes us from 1876, I guess, to 1954, and then you've got the whole civil rights era. And that goes from 1954 through the 60s into the emergence of Black Power period in the late 70s and 80s, and then the moving of political, economic, and social evolution in in terms of the whole African American experience. And so that I see that moving along that continuum, I see that there's been theological reflection, that Black folks have been transformed into how they are together sociologically, how they function politically, how they function economically, and how they function socially. And so that, there's never been a time when the faith has been devoid of, when they have not been trying to live out what it was that they believed, and so that the faith has been a means that we've worked out. We've got to make some sense out of life. That's what the faith does. The faith says, who is God? Who are we? What does God do for us? What does God expect of us? How do we respond to this? And how do we deal with with folks that are different than us in light of the fact that we are in this relationship with God. And I think that the answers that they've come to have been appropriate to the situation and the condition and the aspiration of people. I mean, that's why folks, religion speaks to people's situation, their conditions, and their aspirations. And that's why when you talk about God, there's a very real sense in which who God was for black folks was not who God was for white folks. White folks looked at God from the perspective of their position as oppressors. Black people looked at God from the perspective of their position as the oppressed. What was good news for black folks was bad news for white people. What was good news for white people was bad news for black people. White people said that God justified slavery, that slavery was in accordance with God's will. Black folks said, no, God's against slavery, and that God's going to set us free. And so they were operating as slaves, and white folks were operating as oppressors. And that has been, to some extent, the situation that has always kind of prevailed in relation to different times in which we find ourselves. So in slavery times, we got to deal with, how is what they say about us true? And the answer was no. We are not. We are God's children. We are people of worth, and we're people of significance, and we are people of value. We got to deal with the reality socially. What's our situation? We got to find a way to be with one another and for one another. We got to be able to bandage one another's wounds. We got to be able to comfort one another. We got to be able to help one another run away and escape this slavery. We got to be able to help folks make the best out of this bad situation until we can do better.
Now let me ask you this, Pastor. I like what you're saying here about this issue of the perspective of Euro-Americans versus African Americans. It's obvious theologically it was different because their theological premise had to do with justifying oppression of people of color, and basically African Americans began to evolve eventually in the 50s and 60s. Into the liberation theology aspect, only because Jesus, he advocated the poor. He went against the system in his day. He was for the poor, and he was in conflict with. He was about visiting the sick, healing the sick, feeding the poor. His dialogue on going to prison. He was involved in advocating empowerment for everyone, freedom for everyone, not just a certain sect or a certain group of people, even in the Jewish community. And so the Jewish community had a different perspective, and just like Euro-Americans had a different perspective. But what I wanted to shed light on here is, we've gone through an evolution, and I point out in the 50s and 60s, right, about the issue of the prophetic tradition concerning a religious leader evolving to the point, out of religion to the point where they begin to address social and political ills. Now, it looks like in the 50s with Dr. Martin Luther King, I'm pretty sure there was many other people beyond him, but they began to have more liberation theology. We had more voices in the African-American community that were about liberation of African-American people. And I just want you to touch on that, of why we don't have voices like we used to have that are more powerful in the sense of advocating liberation and freedom for all, not just a certain group. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I think that we have. I think that the Black Church continues to seek to be about the business of freedom and liberation and empowerment for African American people and for all people. I mean, Dr. King and the whole civil rights era was certainly about ending segregation and ending discrimination. But Dr. King, at the end of his life, said that we had to really talk about the beloved community, and that meant that we had to deal with issues of racism, we had to deal with issues of militarism, we had to deal with issues of capitalism, and that triumvirate had to be addressed and addressed from the perspective of what was believed to be the will of God. And that's why at the end of his life he was organizing the Poor People's Campaign to talk about economic justice. He was preaching and standing against the Vietnam War, which he saw as being at odds with the will of God. And he called for black people to be concerned not just about their own liberation, but to be concerned about issues of economics and issues of militarism And black people had some issues with that because our focus was to some extent, in some instances, we just weren't concerned about our rights, etc. But we are wrapped up in the garment of humanity, and that's why I think that when you talk about the church you have to deal with the theology of the church, because the church speaks from its theology to social, political, and economic realities, and that the church is first of all a theological community. And the prophets were not folks who talked about the future so much as they were trying to say, you are not living in harmony with the will of God. Israel's prophets were very clear about the fact that we are the people of God because we've been delivered from slavery in Egypt. We have entered into covenant with God at Sinai. God has given us his will, and we are to be the demonstration people of who God is and what God wills. And we are not living up to that, and because we're not living up to that, we're not living out that, we are failing in relationship to our God-given responsibility and our God-given mission. And the black church has been the agency that has said that black people, in light of their experience, are God's people entering into covenant, and we have to be about the business of living out who God is and what it means to be God's people now. And that's at odds with the prevailing realities of the existing culture. So the black church has been prophetic in the sense that it has critiqued the what is. It has energized on behalf of a different alternative social, economic, and political vision.
Oh, well, all right now, Pastor. Hey, that's a pretty good assessment, of that from the Afrocentric and African American, perspective. And what I was also thinking about is,
And I am enjoying you, Reverend Elisha, and your guest is just awesome. And you really have my blood going at this time because what you're saying is so needed, and I just pray that your listeners understand what is being said. So congratulations, and happy to have you on board. And I will continue to listen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your input.
And the United States has never been a Christian nation as such. When the founding fathers put this nation together and formed the Constitution, they clearly identified who was to be the source of authority in this nation. It was not God. It was not God under any shape, form, or fashion. It was the people. The Constitution begins, we the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, etc., do ordain and establish this Constitution. And when they put together the Bill of Rights, one of the things that they said is that the government shall not in any way do anything that supports or prohibits the practice of religion. So in matters of religion, people were free to believe as they please, and there would be no state-supported religion. And a part of that grew out of the havoc that religious enthusiasm had worked in Europe in the years preceding the founding of this nation. And so this country has from its inception been secular. Now, in the early years of the country, the church was certainly stronger than it is now, but this country has been on a slippery slope in terms of backing away from, moving away from Christianity almost from its inception. And so today, what we find is that we are more secular than Christian, more secular than anything else. And that is certainly true, not only in terms of European Americans, but in terms of African Americans and other Americans, too. So you can believe as you please, as long as you do as we the people say you must do.
All right. Now, we want to try to see if we can get another caller in before we're heading in toward the close, and see if there might be, someone else. But if not, we'll continue. But we just want to give an opportunity to see, if anyone else wanted to give a response, or if had a question, or you wanted to give a statement surrounding some of the things that we've been discussing here on the soul of black religion.
Men and women of God across America, God is raising up intercessors to pray for your youth in America. Our goal, 7,000, praying only for 7 minutes at 7 a.m. God has commissioned me to focus on Atlanta, Georgia, and I am believing God for 7,000 intercessors across America to call upon the name of the Lord for this millennium. Brothers and sisters, mom and dad, grandparents, you have to fight for your children and grandchildren and for the youth of Atlanta. Prayers will be key ingredient in helping us create young leaders in media, music, television, building games and entertainment, and much more.
These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word.
The prophet Elijah Hill said God spoke to him and said to raise up 7,000 intercessors that will pray for 7 minutes a day at 7 a.m. each morning in Atlanta. We're claiming the promise of saving 3,000 souls that they will touch and impact the destiny of 300,000 youth in Atlanta. Register for free online at ElijahLHill.com or call 877-444-7027. That's 877-444-7027 to be one of the Atlanta 7,000. Instead of talking about it, we'll be praying for the youth of Atlanta, raising up the next generation, speaking life into their future and God-ordained purpose.
These are the days of Elijah.
Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord.
Elijah,
Shout, shout, shout.
Elijah,
Shout, 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 shout. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord.
Satan is a liar and a conjurer too. You don't mind how he'll conjure you. If I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Ezekiel said he saw him really in the middle of the week. John talked about it, the book of the 7 seas. Some said the rose of Sharon, others said the Prince of Peace. But I can tell the world, he's been a rock and a shelter for me. Hallelujah, Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah, unto you. If I could, I surely would stand on the rock where Moses stood. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Ezekiel said he saw him really in the middle of the week. John talked about it, the book of the 7 seas. Some said the rose of Sharon, others said the Prince of Peace. But I can tell the world, he's been a rock and a shelter for me. Hallelujah, Elijah rock, shout, shout. Elijah rock, coming up, Lord. Elijah rock, shout, shout.